Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Kuf Chav Zayin in Baba Basra. Perek Yesh Nochlan, as we learned for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Sun Matzar B'Shivya, and for the safe return of all hostages and soldiers. Let's take it again. We'll repeat the last keta that from yesterday's daf, because this will lead us into today's daf. Let's pick it up from Kuf Chav Vav Amid Beis, yesterday's daf, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. We covered this yesterday, but let's just review it. We've learned, of course, that a Bechor who gets a double share gets a double share in the father's, right, of the father's estate. And he's got not only the father's estate, but it's got to be a Bechor of the father. Can't be a Bechor of the mother, Bechor of the father. Okay, but it's got to be a real Bechor. We know that he's a Bechor from the time of birth. That's what we're going to see now. 4 lines from the bottom of Kuf Chav Vav Amid Beis. Ravami, Amar Ravami, Tumtum Shenikra. So we learn a Tumtum is a person who's born with his genitals are covered up. We can't tell who they are. After, at the time of birth, you couldn't tell if he was a boy or girl. And he was the firstborn child to the father. And then it turned out that he was a male. They uncovered it, did an operation or a tore open, and his male genitals were exposed. And now we know he's a boy. He doesn't get a double share, even though he's the firstborn male of his father. And the ben Bechor will be ben Mishasavai. As soon as he's born, it's got to be a son. In other words, when the doctor or the midwife took the baby out, right? He didn't say, "Congratulations, you've got a boy." He said, "Congratulations, you've got something. We don't know what it is yet." That's no good. Then that, even though it turns out he is a boy, and he might be a nice boy and a big boy, he might become president of the United States, he might be everything, but he's not a Bechor. That's what Rav Ami's Chiddush is. Now, similarly, Rav Nachman Yitzchak goes on to say, "Af en ben Sarmor." You know what? This boy, if he becomes a ben Sarmor just around his bar mitzvah age, the rules of ben Sarmor are complicated. We'll see that in Sanhedrin, right? That he also cannot become a ben Sarmor, even though he fulfills all the other requirements and conditions for ben Sarmor. His parents have to have the same voice. He's got to be stealing stuff from his father and meat and all kinds of stuff like that around his bar mitzvah time. Even so, he's not going to be ben Sarmor Damarkavas Kieli Ish ben Sarmor means more Ache ben Mishasavai. As soon as he's around, as soon as he's there, he's got to be a ben. He's not a ben because at the time he was born, he wasn't a son. Later on, it was found out that he was a son. That's not good enough. It's got to be from the time that he was born. He had to be a boy, and that wasn't the case. A Maimer says at the top of Kuf Chav Zayin, a third indication here also. He also does not diminish the Chelik Bechorah. We went through the Rashbam yesterday. We'll explain it outside like this. Let's say there's 3 boys, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. Reuben's the Bechor. Shimon's a regular. He's a Pashut. Levi was born as a Tumtum. And it turned out, after all, he was a boy later on. But we don't diminish the Chelik Bechorah. What do you mean by the Chelik Bechorah? Let's say the father left 9 shares, right? 9 shares. So you would think if there were 3 regular boys, that each get 3 shares, right? 3 boys, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. But over here, we first have to determine the Bechor's share. What's his double share? What's that extra share? We don't look, we discount Levi totally, because at this point, he's not a boy. We don't know, right? So therefore, we look at it as if in terms of determining what's the Chelik Bechorah, the extra share that the Bechor gets, we pretend that Levi's not there. That means you look at it as if Reuben and Shimon are there. If Reuben and Shimon are there, and there's 9 shares. Reuben's the Bechor, Shimon's the Pashut, and there's 9 shares. How does it get divided up? You divide it up into 3, 9 shares divided by 3. Each one is 3 shares. The Bechor gets 6 shares, right? Gets 6, and the Pashut gets 3. Okay, what's the Chelik Bechor? What share does he get over and above the other one? 3. The 3 shares out of the 9 shares, he gets 3. That's a Chelik Bechorah. That stays with him. He gets those 3 are not diminished by the Levi. In other words, if they would be diminished by Levi, what would you do if you have 3 boys? The oldest one's a Bechor. How do you divide it up? You take the 9 shares, and divide it 4 ways. 4 ways. And of the 4 ways, right? If you divide it 4 ways, each share is how much? 2 1/4, whatever, right? 2 1/4. And the Bechor would get 2 1/4 times 2, right? 2 1/4 times 2 is 4 1/2. That would be his. But we don't do that. We don't divide it by 4. We say the Levi is discounted in terms of determining what's the extra share that the Bechor gets. we don't look at Levi. So we look at it as if there's only Reuven and Shimon. Reuven and Shimon, then the Bechor share is the extra part that he gets is 3, because there would be 6 to him and 3 to the Pashut. So the extra one is 3. Okay, those 3 are his. Now what's left? 6, right? Now, as a Pashut, Levi is a Pashut, even though he wasn't the time born. If he was born, he wasn't a Zachar, but he still turns out to be a Zachar. We just doesn't diminish in the Chelik Bechora, because it says V'yold again, Shenemar V'yoldu lo bonim ad shei ben b'shas later. When you determine the share of the Bechor, you look at the children who were there, boys at the time they were born. At the time they were born, Levi wasn't a boy. He was only determined to be a boy later on. So therefore, how does this get divided up? The Bechor Reuven gets 3 because that was determined already. You just look at Reuven and Shimon. He gets 3, that's his extra share. Then you take the other 6 and divide that 3 ways. So it comes out that, right, you get 5, 2, and 2. Exactly, that's how it works out. Okay, so that's the third thing that's determined by the fact that this Tumtum was not a boy at birth. Rav Shizbi, or Gears is slightly says, Rav Shar, some have Rav Sharviyah, but let's say Rav Shizbi says, Rav Shizabi Amar, Afin and Shmona. He doesn't get a bris on the 8th day either. Now, it doesn't mean he doesn't get a bris. Of course, he's a boy, he needs a bris. But it's not a halacha, as we'll see. It's not a halacha. It doesn't have to be on the 8th day. In what sense? In what sense that it's Docha Shabbos? A boy who's born as a boy, remember if a kid is born, let's say, by cesarean, even though he's born on Shabbos, the bris is not next Shabbos. The bris is not on the 8th day. It's only if he's born naturally that he gets that. Isha Kizrev Yolda Zachar and only if it's a regular birth. Well, here too, this isn't a regular birth. He was born as a tumtum, even though it turns out the next day he was a boy, but his bris is not Docha Shabbos, so it doesn't have to be on the 8th day. Okay, so that's what he says also. He wasn't born a boy. He was born a tumtum. Later on, it turned out he was a boy. His bris is not Docha Shabbos. That's the fourth nafkamina of the fact that of this tumtum who wasn't born as a boy. In other words, it wasn't evident at birth that he was a boy. Rav Sharvia Omar, later. Listen to this. When a woman gives birth, we've learned this halachas many times in Need and elsewhere. She is tamei, right? Whether it was a dry birth or not. In other words, even if there was no blood, she's tamei. If it's a boy, she's tamei for 7 days, followed by 33 days of yomei tahara, meaning she can go to the mikveh. She can go after the 7 days. She can live with her husband, and she sees any dam, that's dam tar. It's based on dam. It's assumed to be dam later. Today we're not knowing that because we can't differentiate between between nida, zava, leda, etc. So we always go l'chumra. But minatora, if a boy is born, she's tummy for 7 days, followed by 32 days of Yom. If it's a girl, 14 days of Tumah, followed by 66 days of Yom. Okay. He says, you know what? It's not a birth. It's not a birth. She's not tummy at all. Af eini mutmea later. Now this is a tough one. Rav Shavi Omer af eini mutmea. It's not considered a birth. Domer Kra Isha says Rev Yolda Zocher. If she gives birth to a boy, v'tama shivas yomim. She didn't give birth to a boy, she gave birth to a tumtum. The Torah says if she gives birth to a boy, tummy 7 days. Birth to a girl, 14 days. Birth to a tumtum, no, she's not tummy at all. Okay, that's what we have so far. Now we're gonna. The reason I reviewed this is because we have kashas on it. Meisvei. Wait, the first of the wide lines in the Gemara. I'm a pelos tumtum androgus. Let's say a woman miscarried a tumtum or androgus. Farshim say it doesn't have to be mapels, and some even gives some gear says hayoletis. Doesn't make any difference if she miscarried a tumtum or androgynous. Androgynous, of course, has both genitals, male and female. And the tumtum, we know you can't tell yet. So whether she miscarried or whether she gave birth to a tumtum or androgynous, either way, question is, what is she tamei? Is she tamei 7 days or 14 days? We don't know what it is. If it's a boy or girl. So the rule is you go l'chumra, teishav l'zachar u'len akeva. You go l'chumra both ways, meaning she's tamei for 14 days like an akeva. And the advantage that she has of the Yomei Tara, we only give her the boys. We're not sure. So what if she comes out that she's tamei for 14 days, right, as an akeva, and then how many days as a zachar does she have Yomei Tara? 14 from 40 would be how much? 36, right? So she has 36 days. No, what did I say? 26. She has 26 days of tahara. Okay, you go l'chumra. Okay. So the Tifta Rav Shavia Tifta. This is clearly kasha on the last one. Rav Shavia said she's not tamei at all. It's not a birth. It's not a birth, she's tamei el. Here we see from this Mishnah in Nida, in Masechta Nida, she's tamei. So tifta Rav Shapiro, it's certainly a kasha on Rav Shapiro. He says she's not tamei. He says, of course you go l'chumra. Le'matavi tifta Rav Shizbi. Now Rav Shizbi was the fourth one. What did he say? That you don't get a bris on, maybe it's a kasha on him too, because it's just like it's not a birth. In other words, he's not a zohar, doesn't get a bris l'chara, also she wouldn't be tamei either. Does he also agree, so to speak, does Rav Shizbi agree with Rav Sharvia that she wouldn't be tamei at all? Because he says it's not a birth. It's not a birth in the sense that he doesn't get his bris automatically on the 8th day, even if it's Zochar Shabbos. So would he agree with that too? As a kasha Rav Shizbi says more no. The Tana in Nida, that this case of Mapelas Tumtum and Drogas, that's Zachem Kiva, spoke himself, he's not sure. He's not sure l'chumra. In other words, we're not sure what this lady's status is. Is she not tamei at all? Rav Sharvia says she's not tamei at all. Well, that's a big chiddush. You're giving her a big advantage. She gave birth over here. She might have bled profusely at birth, right? When she gave birth to this tumtum or androgynous or miscarried, it makes no difference. She miscarried something over here, right? Rav Sharvia says she's not tamei at all. Ooh, that's a big chiddush. So Rav Sharvia is certainly a kasha, but Rav Shizbi could just be going l'chumra, meaning the Tana in Nida is also not sure what his status is. Maybe she's not tamei at all, like Rav Sharvia, or maybe she's tamei like a zachor and a keva. We go l'chumra, right? We give her the tumah of 14 days and the tara of only 26 days. He's not sure, so he goes l'chumra. And Rav Shizbi is also going l'chumra. Think about it. When he says he doesn't get a bris on a go l'chumra, you're not sure. What do we do when a baby is born Friday at Ben Hashmashos, right at Ben Hashmashos? You're not sure if it was born on Shabbos. Regular birth. Baby, a boy is born, regular birth. You're not sure. What do? You can't give the bris on Friday because maybe the baby was born on Shabbos. Might be too early. A bris too early is not a bris. You can't do the bris on Shabbos because maybe the boy was born on Friday. If it's born on Friday, the bris is not a bris that's delayed is not done on Shabbos. Baby's sick or whatever the reason is, but baby, on Shabbos. So you do the bris on Sunday. If Sunday's Yontif, you do it on Monday. If there's 2 days of Yontif, you do it on Tuesday, and go on and so on and so forth. You get up to 12 days, whatever. It could be a long time, assuming the baby's healthy. So what do? You go l'chumra. So maybe the Tana there is also going l'chumra. I'm not sure if she's not tamei at all, or she's tamei like a zachar, or tamei like an akeva. So you go l'chumra. And that's what Rav Shizbi is also saying. I'm going l'chumra. Yes, it's a birth, but I'm not sure if it's docha the 8th day. So he's going l'chumra. Claims the Rashbam. So wait a minute. If he's going l'chumra yachi teisha l'zachar l'keva ulenida. Think about it. If you're going l'chumra, the Tana over there who says, listen, she gives birth to a androgynous or a tumtum, not sure. So we say she has to sit like a zachar l'keva, meaning 14 days tumah. 26 days of only 26 days. Now, wait a minute. If you go on the Chumrah, maybe it wasn't a birth at all. And if it wasn't a birth at all. And if she gave birth anywhere between the 15th day and the 40th day, meaning those 26 days, maybe she's in Nida. Remember, it's a kula also, even though you say compared to Zachar, compared to Nekeva, which has 66 days of Tara, Zachar's only 33 days, so you're giving her 26 days of Tara. That's also kula. Maybe she's a Nida then. And there's a whole arichas over here in Rashbam about it's possible that she could also be a Zava if she gave birth on the 34th day, whatever. If she saw Adam on the 34th day, maybe the 41st day is really the beginning of Zimei Zava. It's very complicated. So why doesn't he say that? That's just kasha. He says if the town over there Nida is going to Chumri, Nida. That's what it should say. This kasha. Rashbam says it's only a kasha, it's not a tufta, because he could always answer. Rashbam says a little bit below the halfway mark in the widest lines in the Rashbam. You could say, yeah, he meant be l'chumra there too. Could be, he says he could have put in the word the nida there too. Kasha. Okay. Amarabah. So we have this understanding of there's a problem if a baby's born as a tumtum, and if it only turns out later on that he's a boy, he's not a bechor lenachla, and he can't be a ben sar morer, and he doesn't diminish the share of the bechor if he's not the bechor, if he's the second son or later son, and his bris doesn't have to be on the 8th day. Could be. It's not Shabbos. Try to do it on the 8th day. If the baby's healthy, I would imagine if the baby was born as a tumtum and needed an operation to to expose his genitals, I would imagine that they would delay the bris a little bit also until you saw that the baby was healthy following surgery or whatever, or whatever happened over there. But the big finish is that Rav Shapiro says that the mother's not Tamei Nida, and that's a kasha because misafik, maybe she's Tamei Nida, maybe maybe she gave birth to Zachar, maybe she gave birth to a Keva, maybe she's a Nida. We don't know. Go l'chumra. Amar Rabba. Tanya Kabasa Ravami. There's a brisa that like Ravami. Ravami was the first one. His was the first one. What did he say? That if the baby was the firstborn, and he would have been a bechor had he been born with normal genitals, but it turned out he was a tumtum. He's not. It doesn't give a tiny Kabasa Ravami. There's ben below tumtum. It says, well, yeah, ben a bechor lasnia, ben a boy, not a tumtum. Born a tumtum, you don't get it. Bechor below suffix. Listen to this. Now this gets us into an ear. If he's a bechor, he gets a double share. Not he's a suffix. So the Gemara says, Bishlam ben below tumtum Ravami. Okay, that's a chiddush. He was born a tumtum. He doesn't get a double share, even though turns out he was the firstborn male, and other children or other boys come afterwards. Obviously, if he's the only boy, obviously he would get all the Yerusha anyway, right? But if there's other boys afterwards, he's not a bechor. Okay, ben below tumtum Ravami. What do you mean if he's a bechor and not a suffix? What do you mean? We're not sure if he's a bechor or not. Can you think of a case where a person is a bechor and you're not sure if he's a bechor? Let's say a lady gave birth to twin boys. You're not sure which one came out first, right? That could be a suffix. So he says only gets a double share, bechor velo suffix. There's a suffix. So what does that exclude? Obviously, if he's a suffix, how does he have a claim? I says, I may be the bechor. Thank you very much. Maybe you're not. Why? What kind of a claim is maybe I'm a bechor? Only if he's a bechor. Bechor below tumtum, that I understand. Even though it turns out that he's a boy later on, he's not a bechor he wasn't a bechor at the time of birth. He doesn't get a double share. And then he said that's what Ben teaches. You got to be a boy. Bechor below suffix. What's the chiddush? Where does that come exclude? Obviously, he's a suffix. He has no claim anyway. Pukim mit Darish Rabba, to exclude from Rabba's drasha. Listen to Rabba's drasha. Darish Rabba, shtei nashim she'oldu beis sfarim b'machba. I mean, he says, let's say a man had two wives. I don't know why he gives an example. Could have given an example that I just thought of a minute ago. Why doesn't he? Let's say she gave birth to twins, and you don't know which one is there. We'll see why that case that I just said is not such a good case. Not such a good case. We're going to come to that in a minute. Think about that for a minute. If a woman gave birth to two twin boys, first birth. Pardon? Yeah, right. Okay, so there we know, but there we know who came first, right? But and we didn't know which one came first. That's a suffix bechor, right? But we'll see why that's not a good example based on the next case here. Now, let's say a man had two wives, and they both gave birth at the same time. Shtei nashim she'oldu beis farm b'machba, like in a hidden place. In other words, like in a cave or whatever. They couldn't tell. You couldn't tell. And now we don't know which one came out. We don't know who's the bechor. They both gave birth at the same time. Each one had a boy, right? It's not Shlomo Melech's case, right? Two wives, two women gave birth. There was also where two women gave birth, and you don't know which one was going. He had the same husband. He had two children, two boys. Doesn't know which one's first. So Rabbah says, so when it comes to the bechor, maybe there are 10 other boys later on, and they're all fighting. As some people do, they fight over the Yerusha, right? So they're fighting over the Yerusha, and the bechor would likely get a double share, but he can't prove he was a bechor. But they know that one of those two guys, right, the two older boys, Jim and Bob, they're the first two born. Jim and Bob know that one of them is the bechor. All the other kids came much later on, right? Right? They're two dots of hood, has the same date, right? They were born the same time. So what can they do? They can write an authorization for one another. They said, listen, Jim could come and say, look, Bob authorized me. One of us is the bechor. It's either him or me. I'm acting as his agent. So that's good enough. You could do, because one of them for sure is the bechor, right? They'll collect it together and they'll split it. They'll work it out, right? They can do such a thing. So he says, you know what? That's excluded. It's not good. It says bechor below suffix. This is a suffix. When you're coming to collect, now you're not for sure you're a bechor. Maybe it's the other guy. So he says, we're coming to exclude from Rabbah's case. Rabbah says they can do such a thing. They can write such a harsha. But the pasuk said, the brisa says, ben below tumtum, bechor below suffix. If you're a suffix, you can't collect. You don't get a double share. You can't say, I'm coming because I'm coming with Bob's authorization that either he's the bechor or I'm the bechor. You're not sure, you don't get a double share. That's where the pasuk comes to. Amalei Rapapa l'Rabba. So Rapapa said to Rabbah, How can you say that? How can you say they can just come with an authorization? Rabin sent this question. I asked this question of all my rabbis. What do you do in a case like that? Can two brothers, one of whom for sure is the Bechor, we know that one of them is Bechor, but they don't know which one. Can they collect for one another? Right? Can they collect for another? It's a similar case, collecting, let's say, Truma. Remember, a Cohen and a Cohen had a son and he had an Eved, and they got confused, like the prince and the paupers and the Cohen and Eved. Now the Eved can collect can eat Truma. The Eved can eat Truma, and so can the son, but they only get one share. You can only get one share, so you can collect with an authorization of the other one. Similar kind of idea. So here, can they collect? So he says this. They asked Omer, the truth is that Kach Omar Mishum Rav Yanai. We had before, right? That's like the MS Amru. In truth, they asked this name. They said name of Yanai. When can you write a hashah when originally they knew who the Bechor was? They got mixed up afterwards, right? They got mixed up afterwards. Maybe that could be a case also of two boys born to one mother. I'm not sure why, right? Can that be a case? Two boys born to one mother, and originally she knew, this is the Bechor. Like they knew which one came out first. Then they got confused. They were identical twins. You couldn't tell them apart. They got confused. Then, in a case like that, maybe in that case, they could write an authorization for another, because they knew originally at birth, they knew who the Bechor was, right? Lower group, but if they didn't know originally, as soon as they came out, it was dark there. The two boys came right out and they got mixed up there. They don't know which one. They never knew. So what do you see? Rava said, Stam. Yet two boys, one of whom for sure is the Bechor, one is not. We don't know. They can write an authorization for another and collect. How could you say that? They said and we excluded that based on the pasuk. Now, because it says Bechor below suffix. So Rav Papa said to Rava, how can you say that? We have even Rav Yanai in terms of determining this question. Rav Yanai said, well, you can write a harsha if they knew originally who it was. In other words, at birth they knew who the Bechor was. Then they got mixed up. But if they never knew, you don't write a harsha. So Rava then agreed. He retracted. He set up an interpreter and explained this thing, the famous line. And he said, and he expounded. The thing I said, it's a mistake. It's a mistake that they could always write a harsha that two boys, we never knew who the Bechor really was. It's one of them, but we don't know. They cannot write an authorization. They cannot say, well, here's an authorization. Bob gave me an authorization, or Jim gave me the authorization, and we're collecting one share between the two of us. We're getting that double share. You can't do that if they never knew. It's a mistake what I said. This is what they said in Rayani. If they originally knew who they were, then they can write an authorization. Lower group, they didn't know. In other words, Rava was moda that Rav Yanai had said, like Rav Papa had proposed to him, meaning the pasuk excludes. The pasuk says you cannot write harsha. If it's a suffix, you can't collect the double share. So it's excluding presumably the case which is more likely to exclude when they never knew who the Bechor was. They were right at birth. It was a dark room. Two wives gave birth to a kid, or there was a double birth. Twins were born to one woman, and you didn't know right away. That in that case they can't write harsha. But if they knew originally, they knew this was the Bechor. Then afterwards they got mixed up. That happened. They didn't have DNA or fingerprints or whatever it was. They got mixed up afterwards. Then they could write a harsha, and one of them who's for sure Bechor, they can collect between the two of them. They'll get the extra share of the Bechor. Okay, that's what you have so far. Shalfule b'nei Akra de Agma, the people from the fort, the people of Akra is the fort of Agma, that place. They asked him this question: Yom Ben Rabbeinu, hayu muchzaken b'zeh Bechor. Now we've gone from determining the rules of a Bechor, right? That that if a man's a Bechor, he gets the double share, and how it works, and can you actually designate somebody to get more or not? So Amish is mashma nesi, as we saw yesterday in Daf Kuf Lamed, that Rabbi Yochanan Broka says that if it's a particular son among others, you could designate. You can't say my son is a Bechor, is not going to get double share, or this one is not going to get anything at all as Yerusha. As a gift, you could. You do whatever you want, as we said, and we'll say it again. But if he writes it as gift, he can. But now it's when there's not sure who the Bechor is. He's not taking it away from the Bechor. We're not sure who the Bechor is. So what do you do when you're not sure? So We said if he's not sure, if at birth he wasn't sure that he's a Bechor, Rav Ami said that, and Rav Brisa seemed to confirm that if you're not sure at birth that he's a Bechor, it's not a Bechor. That's it. If you were sure and then you got mixed up, then they could do a Harshah. Fine. Okay. Then Rabbi teach us. Let's say there was an assumption this guy was a Bechor, right? Family was here for many years. We always know that he's the oldest son. This is the Bechor. Everybody knew that. It's not like he has Adus that's the case, because if there's Adam that he was the Bechor, right? They were actually Adam. How can you have Adam that he's the Bechor? You have Adam in the room, in the birthing room, whatever, in the delivery room. You have to have Adam like that. In the case it was Adam, you can't go. No, nothing is stronger than Adam in halacha, right? Except the guy showing up himself. When the Adam say he's dead and he showed up in court, that's stronger. But otherwise, Adam are always the most powerful proof of anything. So if you have Adam that he was a Bechor, then there's nothing to talk about. He's the Bechor, no matter what the father says. But let's say there was just, it was an assumption. That was the rumor, or what was well known. Rashbam says that the last two lines on the page. He was called the son, the older son. We always know he was the older son. Father called him my Bechor. So he's a Bechor. And all of a sudden, the Amar of it, now the father says, Al Acher Bechor. Father says, no. This other son is the Bechor. A man has a few sons, and it was one son, the number one is the Bechor, he's the Bechor. Then the father says, no, number two is the Bechor. Who do you believe? Al Bechor, Mao. What's halacha? Shalachlu. He answered them. So Shmuel answered, Kosfin Hashah. You know what? Zelazet. The only thing you could do is, between the two of them, they can collect it. Between the two of them. In other words, there are 5 sons, let's say, right? And it was known that number one was the Bechor. Now the father says, no, number two is the Bechor. He's going against the Chazaka. The Chazaka, everybody know that number one is Bechor. Now he says number two is Bechor. What can you do? So he says, you know what? The only thing you could do is write a authorization. Between the two of them, they can collect the extra share. Between the two of them. That's what he says. And Marissa, what kind of a psak is that? Manavshach. We're going to see now a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. Rashbam explains that the machlokas, when there's a machlokas between Yehuda and Rabbanan, the bar plukta of Rabbi Yehuda is always Rav Meir. Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir always disagree in Mishnayos, and generally the rule is machlokas between Yehuda and Rav Meir, we pass them like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so it's machlokas over here. Do you believe the father? Now, not if it's against the Edom, and nobody's believed against Edom, right? But if there's a chazaka, he was always known as the son. Number one was the Bechor. Do you believe the father? Now say otherwise. Rabbi Yehuda says yes. The Rabbanan say no. He's not believed at all. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, who would be the Bechor here? Again, it was always assumed number one was the Bechor. Father always called him my Bechor. Now the father says number two is the Bechor. So the Shmuel Paskin, split it basically. Let him write an authorization between the two of them. They'll collect it against the brothers 3, 4, and 5, right? But that's not going like Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbanan. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you believe the father, and number two is the Bechor. According to Rabbanan, you don't believe the father. Going against the Chazaka, that would be Rav Meir would say that you're going against the Chazaka, and who would get it? Number one would get it, not number two. So Shmuel says, you make an authorization. Now, this isn't the problem with the authorization we said on Aleph, because we said on Aleph the authorization doesn't work when you didn't know who the Bechor was. But here, kid was born; they were all born normally. And it was always known number one was the Bechor. Now the father says number two is the Bechor. So the Gemara asks Manavshach, if you say like Rabbanan that you don't believe the father, Lishtach like Rabbanan, Shmuel should have answered, pass like the Rabbanan, you don't believe the father against the Chazaka. If he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that you believe the father, Lishtach like Rabbi Yehuda, let him say him, why didn't he pass like Rabbi Yehuda? Answer Masafkalei. Shmuel wasn't sure who he passed like. Ikra Rabbi Yehuda, Ikra Rabbanan. He wasn't sure who you go like, so he says I can't determine who's the Bechor here. That's number one, which we always assume is Bechor, or the father's claim that number two is the Bechor, and therefore I'm not sure what to do. So therefore, the only thing I could suggest is write an authorization between the two of them, and between the two of them, number one and number two, will get the extra share. So if let's say you had $120 was the Yerusha, and there were 5 sons. So you split it, when there's 5 sons and there's a Bechor, you split it 6 ways, right? Each one being $20. So all the other boys will get $20. And the number one and number two will split the extra $20, or they'll write an authorization and work it out between them. Probably fight about that in court too. Anyway, so now What's this machlokes from Yunus Rabbanan? The time we learn Yakir ki as a bechor ben asnua Yakir. What does Yakir mean? He'll recognize, he'll acknowledge. He said, "This is my bechor." In other words, he can't say, "Oh, I love the other wife. I'm going to make him the bechor." No, he's he knows, he recognizes he's the firstborn is really the bechor ben asnua, the Ashes Yifas Toar who he married, right? The Tanya Yakir. Not only can he recognize himself, but he can also establish to others, this is my Bechor. A person's believed to say, again, against the Chazaka, that this is my son as Bechor. Just like he's believed to say, this is my son as Bechor. This son of mine is a Bechor. Let's say a Kohen violated the rules of priesthood and he married a Grusha. The son is a halal, ben grusha, can't serve. So he's believed to say, in other words, he's married. We didn't know that he's married to a grusha, or maybe he was always married to this woman, divorced her, and remarried her. You know, just to be last night, my son told me he came to lend support or give edus at a get of his friend who was recently divorced, and his friend, I knew the last name, and by the last name I knew that he's a Cohen because I know that whole family is Kohanim, and he said he told him, listen, are you sure you know what you're going through here? Because if you divorce her, you can't take her back. She'll be a grusha, you know. So it could be that nobody knew that he had divorced her and taken her back. And he says, no, this son I had after I divorced her, and therefore when I remarried her, he's a ben grusha or ben chalutza. Ben chalutza is a halal drabanan. Because a chalutza is not Kohen can't marry a chalutza. That's the rabbanan because the Gezeira shouldn't marry a grusha. So it's only rabbanan. Either way, he's believed. The Chacham disagree. Ain't an emet. He's not believed. So that's the machlokes of Yunus Rabbanan. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak l'Rabba Bishlam Rav Yehuda. I understand according to Rav Yehuda what handis of Yakir. Yakir teaches me that the fathers believe, even though he's going against the chazaka. You might say, why wouldn't he be believed anyway? Because he can give him the money. You know, if he wants to, he can give the money anyway to him, right? Matana diboy yovle matana pishnaim. Why shouldn't you say? Of course he's believed, because if he wants to, he could just give him whatever he wants anyway. Why shouldn't he be believed? That's what you might say. But that's a migu makam edim, because here the edim we have a chazaka that number one is the bechor, not the other one. So therefore Yakir tells me, no, the fathers believe. You might say he's not believed. He's going against the chazak. El Rabbanan Yakir Lami. The Rabbanan say the father's not believed. So what does Yakir teach me? The father acknowledges or recognizes this is his first son. What is he teaching me there? What do you need that for? That he's not believed. Yakir is a chiddush, right? It says Yakir is like an extra word. He should just say a bechor should get the double share. He says Benoha bechor Yakir, right? He has Ben Asnoa Yakir. He can recognize him. He'll acknowledge him. What do you need it for? The answer is B'tzarach HaKefer, where you don't know. Let's say a guy just showed up in town. Guy just showed up in town with a family. They moved into a remote family with a bunch of kids. We don't know the kids. They all look alike. They all look about the same height. And the father says, this is the Bechor. In a case like that, what's the point? To give him a double share. Well, what's the chiddush in it? He can give it the double share wherever he wants. He can give it to the church. He can give it to a stranger. He can give it the double share wherever he wants anyway. Can't he give him as a gift? What's the chiddush in there? He says Yakir. Oh, that the father can determine who is the son. Again, according to Rabbanan, the father's not believed against the chazaka. When we always assume that number one was the bechor, and the father comes along and says number two is the bechor. Rabbi Yehuda says we believe number two. We believe the father, and number two is the bechor. The Rabbanan say he's not believed. So what's Yakir for? When you don't know anyway, just showed up in town just to tell you his belief. So what's the chiddush in that? He can give him a gift. He can give him the double share anyway, what he wants. He can only give him what's there at the time that he said it. Right? He says, okay, this is my bechor. I'm giving you. Okay, you don't believe me. He's before. I'm giving him the double share right now. You can only give him what he has right now. Let's say he got assets later on, not after death. After death, he doesn't get a double share in what came after death. But let's say things came in after he declared that he's the firstborn. So stuff that came in afterwards, he's before. That's what we need him to determine. With Yakir to teach me that if the father shows up in town and says this is the bechor, he's the bechor. And even if assets came in, the father should be believed automatically because I can give him double share right now of whatever I have. Yeah, but you don't know what you have now is not what you're going to have at the time that you die. You could have less, you could have more. If you have more, you couldn't give him that yet. Will Rav Meir the Amar Adamak Davashav. Don't forget, we said the Bar Plukta of Rav Yehuda is who? Is Rav Meir. And Rav Meir holds that what? That you can be Mak Davashav Olam. So again, Yakir Lamali. And Rashbam says in the second of the wide lines, Rav Meir the Amar, the Rabbanah Rav Yehuda, Hainu Rav Meir, the Amar Adamak Davashav Olam. That you could remember, you could say, Mary be Almanas, that if you're Megayer tomorrow or you're going to be free tomorrow or whatever, you could do some Davashal Bolam, you could do that, Lamali. And a Chasm Shlafuk Shugo says that you could say things that are going to get later on, but something that comes in later on, meaning that you would have the ability, you can give something to somebody else that you're going to get later on, as long as later on you have the ability to give it. Let's say after death, you don't have the ability to give it anymore, so you can't do that. But also there's a condition. Let's say he's dying. If he's dying, he's still a live person, and he can receive an achla, he can receive stuff, he can receive assets. Let's say his broker, as the man was dying, his broker sold off, 1 million shares of stock, and he got $1 million, right? When he's a goses. He's dying though, he can't give it away. He's not even in seichel, he can't do anything. So in a time like that, even according to Meir, even though you can make the V'shav Olam, but it's only things that when you will get them later on, you would have the ability to give away. But when you're goses, you don't have the ability. So even according to Meir, you need this idea of Yakir, that once the father says, this is my son, even though he's not going against the chazakah, according to Meir, Rabbanan, you're not believed against the chazakah. But when you just showed up in town, and I got these 5 boys, this one's the Bechor, that he designates him as the Bechor, and therefore he'll get a double share in anything that the father had up until the time that he died, even stuff that he gets when he's a dying man. Okay, so that's the point. No, because you can make the double share both. No. Okay. The kasha was, why do I need him to designate it? He could give him the stuff anyway. And he can give him the stuff not only now, he can give the stuff that he's going to get later on too, according to Meir. So why do I need why do I need to designate him as a Bechor to get a double share? The father could just say, listen, all my assets that I'm going to get until I die, you're going to get a double share. I'm giving that to you as a double share. And he could do that according to Meir. He could make double shalom. The answer is he can make that only as long as he would have the ability to give it away then, even though he's giving it to him now. Yeah.
The idea of makna and giving it away.
Yeah.
There's a difference between what the Torah says and what and the matana, right? In other words, the Torah says the Torah gets double share.
Right.
Everything.
Right.
And but here, if he's makna something,
right,
then it's a matana.
Right. Absolutely. Either way, it's a matana. The question is it a Torah matana of double share, which means anything at the time of death that was in the possession of the father, he gets a double share. Or, in other words, what do I need the point of declaring him as a Bechor? He could just say, I'm giving everything that I have up until the time of death. I'm giving you a double share in that. Why can't he just do it as a gift, according to Meir? The answer is, if he would get assets when he's dying, he doesn't have the ability to give that away now. But as a Bechor, he'll get all that too. Tana Rabbanan, the 2 dots on Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Beis. Tana Rabbanan. Again, let's say a case where they knew he was a Bechor. Number 1 was assumed that he always called him my firstborn, etc. Now the father said, no, number 2 is the Bechor. We just had that case. Neman, he's believed. Who does it go? That's Rav Yehuda's shita, right? That the father's believed even against a chazaka. Let's say we assume that number 2 is not a Bechor. Now the father said Bechor is a Bechor. Einu Neman. Now he says he's not believed. These 2 things are contradictory. Reisha Rav Yehuda v'Sefer Rabban. It's not a kasha. The Reisha is going like Rav Yehuda, that the father's belief to designate number 2 as the Bechor, even though the chazak is that number 1 is the Bechor. And the Sefer that says, well, if we assume that number 2 is not the Bechor, and the father says he is the Bechor, he's not believed. That goes like the Rabbanim, who say that you're not believed against the chazakah. You're believed only when you showed up in town now and you told everybody who your kids are. Why is it necessary? So he explains it's necessary, even according to Meir, to include assets, that the Bechor will get assets that the deceased came into possession of while he was dying. Rabbi Yochanan. Yochanan says this halacha. Listen to this carefully. Everybody, let's say a man says, "This is my son. This is my son." He's got a lot of people here on his farm, on his plantation. This is my son. And then he says afterwards, "No, he's my Eved Kanani. He's my Eved Kanani." He's not believed. He's not believed. Rashbam explains that a person would never call his slave his son, even though you might say, this worker of mine, I love him like a son. You say, he says, huh? He's like a son, but he's not a son. So he says, he's not believed in that because a person wouldn't say that. In other words, if he said he's a son, he's a son. He wants afterwards to say he's only my slave, and what, he doesn't get a share of the Yerusha? Not believe. Not believe, yeah. Right? Abdi, listen. Let's say he says the other way around. He says he's my slave, Abdihu. Then he says he is my son, Neman. Why? He serves me like a slave. In other words, hey, this is my slave over here. Then he says, yeah, he's my son. Yeah, I was complimenting him that he serves me more like that. In other words, a son is obligated to dress his father, feed him, etc. This guy goes above and beyond. He's like a like a slave. Okay, so but the opposite is true when he's passing the customs house, because in the customs house there used to be something called the slave tax. If you had a slave, you had to pay tax on that. So sometimes he would say he's my son, even though he's not, just to get around that. So here when he says he's a son, right? He explains he says he's my son. Then he says he's my slave. Then he's believed because he was just trying to get around the slave tax. Typical, Jewish thing, right? If he says he's my slave at the customs place, past customs, then he says he's my slave, which incurs him a bigger fine, right? And then he says V'amar benihu, and he's not believed. Can't say he's my son now, maybe to take away shares from the other ones, because he wouldn't have said he's a slave at the customs house, because that incurs a bigger debt. Okay. But Rabbi Yochanan's basic halacha, besides the customs house, it says, then if you say first he's my son, and then my slave, he's not believed. But if he says he's my slave, and then he says he's my son, right, he is believed because he's saying, oh, he serves me like a slave. Meisvei. Kasha on the second part of what Rabbi Yochanan said. Let's say he was serving him like a son. Serving him like a son, he dressed him, he got his food, etc. And he said, he's my son, all right? Then he says he's my slave, and he's not believed in that. Again, because if he says first he's a son, and then afterwards he's a slave, he's not believed in that. Like we said, Rabbi Yochanan said, that part goes in where Rabbi Yochanan said, my son, and then he's my slave, not believed. You don't say, I love him like a son, but he's my slave. No. If he said he's a son, he's a son. You can't change your mind there. But let's say he went above and beyond. He served him like a slave. He did everything for him, all kinds of, he wrote, bossed him around, did everything he did. He served him like a slave. And he said, he's my slave. Then he says, he's my son. He's not believed. That goes against the second thing. Rabbi Yochanan said, if I say first he's my son and then he's my slave, he's not believed. If he says he's my slave and then I say he's my son, he is believed because he says he's serving me like a slave. So I over here in the second thing, the second case over here in this kasha, we say what? If he was serving him, right? In the first of the Y lines of the Gemara, he says he's my slave, and then he said he's my son. He's not believed. According to Rabbi Yochanan, he should be believed because he could say he's serving me like a slave, but he's really my son. So I first called him my slave, and then I called him my son. He is believed. Kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. No. Hasam the Karle Avda Meitzer Meya. There, where he says he's not believed to change it and say he's my son, is because he called him not just a slave. He called him a slave with either a rope of 100 or he's a borders of 100. What do we mean by that? My Meitzer Meya, Meitzer Avda Kuf Zuze. That he's worth like $100. In other words, he called him like a real name of a slave. Like this slave is like almost like he said, he's got a slave with a chain around his neck. He's got a slave with a price on him of $100. So they called him that's a real slave. That case is different. Shalach le Rav Abba Rav Yosef. Now we're gonna have a bunch of members. This goes into tomorrow's daf. A bunch of members that Rav Abba sent this halacha to Rav Yosef Bar Chama. And the halacha is like them in all these cases. And one of them is related to our case of Rav Yehuda and Rabbanan, that we pass like Rav Yehuda, that our fathers believed even against the chazakah. All right, but this case was different. Omer lechavero, a man says, Avdi ganavta. We have two guys over here, let's say Reuben and Shimon, not brothers. Reuben says, Shimon, hey, you stole my slave. What's he doing? Says, Omer, look, I didn't steal any slaves. So why is he with you? Why is my slave with you? If he isn't. He says, you sold him to me. You gave it to me as a gift. He's in my possession. Now, at that point, that's enough to deflect him. He doesn't have to do anything. Why? because Reuven, who's making a claim, the plaintiff was making a claim and saying, you stole my slave. Well, you don't swear to take, you only swear to potter yourself. What about Shimon, the defendant, who says, no, I bought him legitimately, all that? Should he have to swear? You don't swear on slaves, just like you don't swear on karka. So technically, you can say, listen, go fly a kite. Right. You could say, that's right. Let him bring a proof. And he can't make it. There's no shvu over here. Let him bring a proof. But you know what Shimon says? I'll tell you what. I don't have to do anything. I'm walking away. You have no proof. I'm walking away. But I'll tell you what. I don't want bad feeling here. You swear that he's yours. I'll give him to you. You swear that he's yours, and that's not the halacha. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to do that. He could just listen. You have no proof. Go fly a kite. But he says, Ritzoncha, top line on the page. Ritzoncha, he shava swear, but till then you'll give him. Finishman. Then the guy swore. Reuben says, yes, he's mine. I never sold him to you. I never gave him to you. Can Shimon say, well, I was just fooling. You know, I didn't have to. I don't have to swear. You didn't have to swear. I just said, what?
He didn't think he was going to.
He didn't think he was going to swear. So, but could he walk away and say, well, I don't care. I don't care if you swear. I was just fooling. Your shvua has no meaning. That's what he sent. That's the halacha that he sent. He can't go back. He sent him. Can't go back. So what's the chiddush in there? We learned in Sanhedrin, which we're going to have the next Masechta, Amrlo. There were two guys fighting over something, and they had no real proof, right? No real proof. But Amrlo says, no, I'll tell you what. Let's get my father can be the judge. Now, the father can't be a judge in a case that involves a son. But the other guy said, I'll believe your father. Or your father. My father will be the judge. Your father will be the judge. Three cowherds will be believed. He just says Roy Bucker. Rashbam says not Roy Tzon, because some Roy Tzon are considered ganavim because they take the sheep and the goats and they steal other people's pasture land. But not so with cattle. So that's it. But the Ramaratzim, I'll accept any judgment. Even though it's not a legitimate judge, because he's my father or your father or three judges. Rav Meir says, you can go back on that. Because that's not, I'm just fooling with you. It doesn't mean anything. It's not legitimate. I can't go back. So what's Rav Abba teaching me over here? That what? That if a guy accepted it beyond the call of duty, he didn't have to accept it. He could have walked away. But he said, if you swear, I'll let you have it. What's the chiddush in that? We pass like the chachamim. You can't go back. Once you agree to it, you can't go back on it. So what's the chiddush? The shiloh over there is when he said, the machlokus over there was when he said, I'll accept my father, your father. Was he just trying to say, I'm not going to give you something? Or was he just saying, listen, swear, and you don't have to pay, meaning the defendant swore. The defendant swore over there. The guy said, give me something. And he says, listen, you swear, and he swore, he gets to keep it. But here the chiddush is, even where he said, swear, and I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. That the halach is like the chachamim, even in a case where he said, listen, if you swear, I'll give it to you. It's one thing to swear, and I don't have to pay. I don't have to give it. You have a claim against me. You don't have a real claim, right? You don't have a real claim. But you agreed that if I swear, I don't have to pay you. But it's a bigger thing to say, if you swear, I'll give it to you. If you swear, you're the plaintiff, you're making the claim, and I'll give it to you. The chiddush is, over there's a shiloh, what the machlokus is between the chachamim and Rav Meir. When Rav Meir says, he can't go back on it. The Rav Meir says he can go back on his saying, you swear and I'll give it to you. You swear and we'll believe you. And the Chum say no, he can't go back on it. Once he agreed to let the other guy make a shvua, is that only when the guy making the shvua is making a shvua to deflect payments so that he patches himself, or even where the guy making the shvua is the plaintiff and the defendant says, if you swear, I'll give it to you. It's one thing you're swearing to get off you don't have to pay, where you have to swear, where the other guy swears, and I say, if you swear, I'll pay you, I'll give you the slave back. That's a bigger chiddush, and the halacha is still like the chacham. Tomorrow we'll see other cases where Rav Abba sent halacha to Rav Yosef, and the halacha Rashbam says is like all these cases. Kohen Ishach Rav Abba, the halacha is like them, and one of them is the case of Rav Yehuda.
How can you do that?
What? Yeah. That's right. Well, what he did effectively, what we said was, according to Meir, you could sell him the future rights, but he said basically, I'm giving you the first. I'm giving you the double share, and the double share there meant not only that, the brachos, etc. Right? The brachos, he was selling him the brachos too, Maybe he was selling him also the double. Pardon?
The brothers were separate.
Or separate.
Right.
Did he sell things? Okay, so he sold him his rights. Like you could sell a share, you could sell a future. He sold him his rights.
So he sold him his double share?
His double share, yeah. Sold him his double share, presumably.
You can do that.
Yeah, why? I mean, you could. Contra, maybe you could certainly be Makdav Shalom.
Yeah.